you can probably feel like a little bit of that void, or you can there's just like this thing in your gut that kind of tells you like, there's maybe something here that I should be exploring because I'm feeling restless, or I'm feeling like I have questions about like where I am in life right now. And maybe
Yeah.
it starts with this concept of understanding purpose and understanding why we choose to do what we choose to do. So,
Welcome to the On the Path podcast, a conversation on navigating life. Join Chris Coker and Colin Creech as they have honest conversations with fellow travelers on the path. In each episode, they explore the physical, mental, and spiritual health aspects of the whole self, striving for personal accountability and a strong community. Gain insights, learn from our mistakes, and hear from guests who have mastered these areas. Step on the path, embracing every challenge and success along the way. See you on the path.
And we are back. No, go ahead. There you go. Stole it from me again, Chris, but at least we know we are back. But just taking away my one thing for this show that is important to me is the pre-start clap. But
I couldn't
now
tell
that
if
we
you were
are
doing it.
back,
I didn't see.
I
I
actually
didn't
wasn't
see.
going to, so I'm very thankful you actually did it today. But we we just had our first very long form podcast with Bill, and I talked to him just a couple weeks ago, and he said he listened to it a few times, and which just goes to the level of thought and intentionality he brings to those shows. But I told him just his Tesla in the jungle example was what made it for me, what better way to understand something. But
Yeah.
before we dive in, before we reflect a little bit more on that episode, of course, I'm going to bring an icebreaker into this if you
Oh
potentially
God.
forgot. And this is kind of an oldie but goodie. We've kind of done a version of this before, but
All right.
if your life right now was a movie genre, what would it be and who would be playing you? And I'll tell you this, bonus points if it's not The Rock, okay? Because you can't have everything.
All right. So
So
if my life
genre
was
and
a
actor.
movie,
Yeah.
my life was a movie, and who would be playing me?
So the genre of the movie and the actor that would be playing you.
If my life was a movie, I mean, I hate to say it, but I feel like it'd probably be like a rom-com right now. Like life is just kind of easy. Like there's nothing overly challenging. Like I'm in kind of like a smooth period. Like the kids are just
Okay.
in sports and enjoying school. Like we're in a good spot, I guess. So it feels like something lighthearted and fluffy. Who would be playing me? I'm gonna go with Gerard Butler. Gerard Butler would be playing
Oh,
me in this rom-com.
nice. Okay.
So,
Like Den
yeah.
of Thieves, Gerard Butler, where he definitely had a trainer before the movie and
That's
got the
yeah,
rugged
like
look on.
Kingly
Yeah,
Actor.
okay. I was thinking the guy that plays Superman. But when he was
Henry
in Mission
Cavill.
Impossible, yeah, you just got to get the mustache. Yeah, you'd own it, man. Come on, Henry Cavill. That would be the go-to. But
That's true. I could take that. Hey, that'd be all right.
rom-com. Okay.
That's just what comes into my
Yeah.
mind. I
Yeah.
wish they could say like action movie, but I don't have anything like overly exciting happening in my life right now. It's just very like mellow and stable. And
Yeah.
it feels like a
Yeah.
fluffy rom-com.
Yeah, just a movie about life, like a family's life,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
just did a long road trip for vacation. That there's probably some cinematic quality events that happen there. So
Yes. Yeah. Good one. I didn't see that
yeah.
coming. We just talked about like show prep, and icebreaker was not on the list, but
But I forgot to do the claps. So hey, we pulled it through. But back to the episode, this year again being a lot more focused. What are those topics important to us? We started with Build Journey, long form podcast, and a big question, a big thing right now is this, maybe crisis of purpose, but we wanted to take it a step back and like, how do you discover your purpose? And Bill's written a book on it. He's done a lot of, I would say, deep work in his own life to be able to then create that framework and help guide people there. But that was a deep one. What were the things that stuck out to you? What were some of those aha moments besides for me, the Cybertruck in the jungle, which was a great one?
No, it is really good. And I think you're right. And one of the things, I mean, we've talked about this now in a few episodes, so I won't unpack
Yeah.
it. You can go back in earlier episodes and listen to it. But we really learned last year that the whole self philosophy is all lending itself towards, well, why? Like, what's the point in being, good at all these things or working on ourselves in all of these different ways? Why would we want to do that? Uh, you could say, well, to help us thrive in our lives. Well, why?
Mhm.
Why do you want to thrive in your life? To what purpose might you want to thrive in your life? So that really is where we landed this year with some of these conversations. And to your point, Colin, meeting with Bill Journey again was a chance to just kind of unpack um, his view on purpose and how to find it. And it really, you already are alluding to it, but it took us to this place of like understanding that there is a crisis of purpose in the modern age for any number of reasons that we can get into. But why might that be the case? That was one thing that kind of stuck out to me with the conversation with Bill. But I think the one that stood out the most was like this actionable approach to discover what it might be, right? His the framework that he has in the book, he kind of models out how we can just kind of go through this thought process of thinking about what our purpose might be. How do we put these other distractions aside and think about why we're choosing to get up in the morning and do the things that we're choosing to do? So that for me was a really impactful part of the conversation
Yeah.
was how do we make this actionable, right? It kind of takes
Yeah.
purpose from this nebulous concept into like a real conversation and an opportunity to take action on it.
I think that the actionable part is it can be overwhelming at times, right? And that's where we'll talk at the end of the podcast. How can you start this journey for yourself? Because yeah, as you said, the whole self philosophy,
Mhm.
I feel like we got it right. We went through and redefined it at the end of last year, but we always talk about, hey, if you're on the path, it's living into your purpose, living intentionally, but never got to the point where we're like, well, how do you know what your purpose is, or how are you doing these why are you doing the whole self philosophy, why are you taking these action items to stay on the
Yep.
path? And
Yep.
I think for me, with the conversation with Bill too, is if you haven't listened to it, I recommend it. It's long, but it's worth it. And that's where it's a good place to start if you just want to hear people talking through it and hearing from an expert. But also, especially if you're thinking about starting that own process in your life of, let me dive a little deeper. Let me start putting my own purpose together. I
Yeah.
think for you and I, Chris, we had, some of our own like crisis of purpose in our lives that actually what brought us even closer together when we realized we were having kind of we had a shared experience before we reconnected. And for you, I'll let you share just at a high level, but what did that
Yeah.
look like? What did it feel like when you're having a crisis of purpose? It may not seem like it at the time, right? But we both reflected in that
Yeah.
kind of in a way, what was going on?
Yeah. I think it's easier once it sneaks up on you anyways to like feel the
It
void.
always sneaks up on you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah.
does. It really does. And then it feels like once
Unchecked
it does,
mistakes.
there's
Yeah.
like some weight there. Like if I
Mhm.
think back to God, I don't even know how long ago it was, but when we were in Ithaca, the conversation that we had was around like how did we get to this place? Or I'll speak for myself. How did I get to this place? Like
Mhm.
what like and it wasn't like anything catastrophic happened. Like who knows? I maybe would have told you my life was a rom-com back then too, but uh there wasn't anything major that happened, but it was like this sense of like there's a void, like there's something missing. Like what am I not paying attention to that I should be paying attention to? And it was this feeling of like maybe thoughtlessness, if I could use if I could use that as a word, like just me feeling like I wasn't being intentional enough with the choices that I was making. And this then grew into what we now have, the whole self philosophy and really this exploration of our own purpose and how we contribute to the betterment of ourselves and those around us. So that for me was a biggie. And I guess that's one takeaway that I would ask the listeners to think about is like you can probably feel like a little bit of that void, or you can kind of there's just like this thing in your gut that kind of tells you like there's maybe something here that I should be exploring because I'm feeling restless or I'm feeling like I have questions about like where I am in life right now. And maybe
Yeah.
it starts with this concept of understanding purpose and understanding why we choose to do what we choose to do. So,
Yeah.
and one other comment I'll make, Colin, is like I think it's easy to turn this into some pie in the sky conversation. Like, oh, how in the world are we supposed to talk about
Yeah.
purpose? Like, do I need to start journaling or whatever else? I think it just like it should just be comfortable, right? Like if it's over a cup of coffee or over a beer with a friend, great. If it's, thinking about it while you have headphones, going on a run, like it doesn't have to be this like meditative, I'm journaling situation that I think often when you think purpose, that's kind of where your head goes, is like
Yeah.
this more like reflective and very like thoughtful
Yeah.
approach to doing it. I would encourage people to think about how to explore this conversation just in their everyday life, in
Yeah.
how whatever that looks like for them.
Yeah. And I think kind of similar experience, it wasn't a rom-com for me, when I was going through it. But you use the word a lot, like unchecked mistakes, and they don't always have to be
Yeah.
mistakes in a way, but there's just these little thought processes or little things for me that got me into a deep depression. I was battling with suicidal ideation. I was masking it well. We were friends at the time, but I didn't tell anybody. And that's where I know part of our whole self philosophy is strong community. And I just wasn't close with my friends and community or asking for help. And you kind of mentioned like, what was it feeling like? Yeah, void. I think like this weight, like I'm not living for something bigger than myself, or I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. And I think that's something that is in a way a modern crisis, because we just
Yeah.
have access now to whatever. I'm going to completely botch whatever the stat is, but if you think a couple hundred years ago, how much news and information did they get in their entire life that we have access to in 1 hour in social media, on the internet? But the crisis of purpose, I think it's a crisis more so that we also have a lot of opportunities to just not address it or not think about it.
Yeah.
And so that's where, when we pull through, okay, Bill's book, which is great, My Intentional Journey, getting into the front seat of your life, has the framework in this book, but has as you go through chapter after chapter, it really helps you kind of get to that framework, because it's a step-by-step process. And I love thinking about his framework
Yeah.
is the who am I, what am I, why am I, like these very basic questions of starting, because we've got the who am I, my worldviews, my values, my experiences, the what am I, like the roles and responsibilities in my life, for you, family, work, for me, my family that I was born into, not the family I with
It's all
kids and a
family, still
wife, but
counts.
yeah, family. That's where you can quote maybe another actor that could be playing in your life, from Fast and Furious. Name is eluding me, but the finally then, like, why am I? Those all build up to that. What is that higher purpose?
Yeah.
What am I really trying to live for on a day-to-day
Yeah.
basis? And I think it can vary for people, and I think that also goes back to the who am I, like some of those very core aspects that then can lead you to your purpose.
Yeah.
When you
And I
think
think
about,
one
go
important
ahead.
thing
Yeah,
to think about too is
please.
also like, so the reason those questions matter, it's something that
Yeah.
reminds me of our conversation with Dr. Steve Rose. And he
Mm,
was actually the first time I had heard this concept of a crisis of purpose in the modern age. Like
yeah.
that really came out of a conversation with him initially. And one of the things that I really appreciated from him was, it's not that everything is doom and gloom. So like maybe that's the tone that, a
Mm,
listener or two out there, you might be thinking like, oh, there's too much of a doom and gloom tone, that it's not all bad. That's not what we're suggesting. We're not suggesting that it's all bad. One of the things that Dr. Rose had said was, part of the reason that there is a crisis is because now you have options, right? So it's not just distractions, but now you get to choose, right?
yeah.
So a few hundred years ago, you might have just been born into a family of farmers and you were going to be a farmer. If you were going to be, it would be decided for you if you were going to be, put into the clergy as you got older. Like there was no choice for you. Like you were born into a station and that
Yeah.
was how it was. Then the age of the internet came around, and now, I think about it in my own life. I also think about it in parenting when I'm talking to my kids. Like I've literally told my children, like, you can be whatever you want to be. If you want to be a doctor, if you want to be an astronaut, like you have the ability now to
Yeah.
go out and do that. And that to me is what exacerbates this concept of a crisis of purpose, because now we're in a position where we have to think about it and we have to make the choice for ourselves.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm sharing that is because I think that is what makes the questions that you just hit on, Colin, so important. Like, because now we have
Yeah.
to think about it. And I think Bill's framework, what it does is it gives us kind of a foundational stepwise process to thinking about it, so that when we're faced with those choices in how we decide to live into our purpose, we at least now have something that's a little bit more focused.
Yeah. I mean, actually, after this episode, I might just go scroll social media for 5 hours just to, get distracted again now. But when you think about everything we talked about with Bill, and how do we make this actionable for listeners? I mean, we talked about, starting in little places, it's unique for everybody, but I think for me, it's the bite-sized approach always, because how I would wish it would have gone for me is I could just sit down for an hour, I'm in the mountains or something. I've got a cup of coffee. I got a journal. You just, jam it out. You got it all figured out. Okay. That's my purpose. I'm good for life. But talking to Bill, it, it wasn't overnight. He talked about it in the podcast. This was something that, through his 20s and 30s, he was reflecting on, refining. So where do people start? What would your recommendation be on, okay, I
Yeah.
want to think about my purpose more today. Like what's the best place to maybe just start reflecting on? Because it's not going to be maybe overnight for most people, maybe multiple years, maybe decades, which is
Yeah,
okay.
it could be. It could be. It's a great question.
Yeah.
So a quick comment on what I said before. Like, it could be journaling for some people.
Yeah.
Like, if you are somebody who really likes to write and you like to be in your head and in your own thoughts, it could be something like that.
Yeah.
But I'll give you, I guess, a direct answer to your question, Colin. For what would I do?
Yeah.
I'm a social person. I'm pride myself in being a conversationalist. I like to
Yeah.
talk to people. So for me, I think it starts with asking others, right? We talk about community, we talk about building relationships. It's part of the reason you and I are so well connected. We have other friends in our lives. And I think for me, it's about, like, when I hear something from you, and men, by the way, are especially bad at this, but it's digging into why. And I'll
But
give
we
you
can
credit. I
get good at
remember
it. We can get good at it. Yeah.
we can absolutely
Yeah.
get good
Come
at it.
on. Yeah.
And I'll give you some credit, Colin. You're one of the first people I met that was just a little bit naturally good at being inquisitive when talking to a friend. And I remember it's when we went to that conference in DC and we were having, I think it's, but anyways, we were chatting
Yeah.
together and I was talking to you about, the Suit Soldier podcast and some of the workouts that I was doing and like all of these things. And you just asked me, like, well, why? Why do you do these things? I think the answer I gave you at the time was, like, I got goals, right? Like, I felt maybe uncomfortable at the time and I kind of just brushed it off as like, well, but the
Yeah.
fact that you asked that, like, that you took the position of being inquisitive, I think is really important, because that opens the door for the opportunity for us to then have a real conversation where I can tell you all of the reasons why I do those things. And that starts driving towards that conversation around purpose.
Yeah.
So for me, I think at this point in my life, I would take that out of your playbook. I would absolutely just try to drive into these things as part of a conversation with somebody else.
Mm.
Now, I find myself, if I'm talking to you and there's a choice you're making in your life or one of my other friends, I might ask them, well, why are you making that choice that you're making? I know that this is what your current job is. These are the things that you're doing over here. Like, and so that concept of actively listening,
Yeah.
doing that in somebody else's life helps me help myself. Like,
Mm.
when I unpack that conversation with somebody else, it gives me a chance to reflect on my own as well. So just
Yeah.
another tactic that really anybody can employ to try to start thinking through, what does this look like in their own
Yeah.
life?
And I was about to just say, like, well, that's your style. I've got this one, but I just had a conversation with a mutual friend, Juan, and I
Oh
won't
yeah.
say your last name, Juan, but we love you. And he was talking to me about a recent, just life-changing experience he had, and it was actually just hearing him talking about it was very, like, almost reinvigorating for me and helping bring up some other deep questions. I'm like, yeah, I want to think more about that, or I
Yeah.
want to reflect on that for myself, or I want to feel that kind of that sparkle you can see in his eye. I want to feel that again. So, where do I
Yeah.
need to begin again? But I do think there's so much to talking to, close friends. And if maybe you don't feel like you have people like that in your life, I got feedback the other day that, because me, I love to write. We've got our episode notes up. I've got notes everywhere. Sometimes a little bit chaos, like I need to get the yarn out and start like connecting all the dots, see the pattern. But for me, a lot of the time it is like just writing things out and then revisiting it
Yeah.
and like what, and starting with the who am I is sometimes a great place to start. Like, what are those worldviews I have, those beliefs? What are my current values? What are
Yeah.
some of those experiences that have brought me to where I am in life? And I think starting with maybe just one of those, like what are those worldviews I hold, is a great place that I would start myself, just by, okay, writing worldview on a piece of paper. What are some
Yeah.
of those worldviews I hold? Because we all have the things that we were raised in from a worldview standpoint, and maybe some of the things that have changed as we're adults. But I do think there's two options right there. If you're trying to think
Yeah.
about where to start, is it talking to a close friend? Maybe it's just sitting down and starting with one place. But again, if you can pick it up, the My Intentional Journey, Getting into the Front Seat of Your Life by Bill is an awesome start.
Yeah.
And he's got a visual too of his framework that all builds up to that purpose. And it's got so much good in there. Or you can also listen to the podcast where we just started diving into the topic, but it could have easily been 2, 3, 4 more hours, and we still probably wouldn't have solved your purpose for you. And that's where eventually it is you taking the ownership and picking at it, knowing it may be a multi-year project. It could be really straightforward, but it's unique in that way for everybody on getting to that. Oh, I know exactly what my purpose is in life.
And one thing, if I can add, Colin, because I think so, we gave, for everybody listening, we gave you two very different examples, right? Colin, on the one hand, maybe it's journaling and kind of keeping your thoughts internal into yourself. And then the example I gave is literally sharing in that with somebody else. Maybe that's kind of the catalyst that you need. But I'll add, because I think this is universal for everyone, you absolutely must create space in your own life to have the opportunity to think about this in the first place. We're all very, very busy, whether it's work or it could be reading a book, or it could be playing a game or watching a movie. Like, we all have our hobbies and the things that fill our time. And I think the only way that you can reach a point where you can be self-aware and reflective enough is to create space, like allow yourself to do nothing. I think it's one of the most underappreciated skills to do nothing, like wake up and go on a walk or do a workout without putting headphones in. And I'm not saying all the time.
You're pushing it. You're pushing it. No music. It's fine. No, it's true.
Crazy person about this, but you absolutely need to find a way to create space in your mind to just let your thoughts wander and let see where they go. And I think that is something that everybody could do. It's not easy, but you can do it. And I think starting with that, then it might be the thing that makes you say, like, you know what, I want to write this down. I just had a really cool thought. I'm going to write that down, or I'm going to call my friend and talk about it. But I think that's one, because we're all super busy. Totally get it. Creating a little bit of space by slowing down and trying to channel, like, I'm going to do nothing, or I'm going to do very little, I think can give people the right kind of motivation to think these things through.
And it's almost like, no pun, Mr. Journey, but your Bill Journey, My Intentional Journey. It's in the title, My Intentional Journey. It's my journey, and I got to be intentional about it. I'll wrap it up with a quote from his book that you pulled out, but it's from Richard Paul Evans. It is a rare human who spends more time looking for truth than protecting their already held beliefs. And it is such a great quote. So much there, but today's your day to be that rare human for yourself, and start asking these tough questions, but doing it with a little bit of grace. And maybe it's talking to a friend, maybe it's writing it down, maybe it's your own unique way. But it just starts with those little bit of intentional steps.
I like it. And as always, we're going to keep this conversation going. This is a great change, Colin. I really I'm learning a lot, being able to kind of spend a little bit of time reflecting a little bit deeper on these really, really meaty topics that just they need space to explore. So as always, my friend, it is a pleasure. And for everybody else out there, we'll see you on the path.
Be on the path.